Welcome back, Belinda.
Hi, Kimberly. So nice to be talking to you this morning.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations on this. It's so gorgeous. The gold foil, honey.
I know. I've got quite a bit of cover envy from other authors because they're sort of saying, you really know your publisher loves you when they put gold foil on your
Yeah,
cover.
you are well loved. And I love the subtitle. So emboldened on finding the fire to keep going when all seems lost. So I cannot wait to dive in to this book with you today. But yeah, I can't get enough. I'm like petting your cover.
I know. They have done the most beautiful cover. And, I talk about one of the women that I talk about in the book is Carmen Amaya, and Andy Warren, who designed that cover. We tried to put a bata de cola, which is the flamenco skirt, in it, but it looked a bit cliched. So he sort of took that inspiration and turned it into flowers. And so it still has those Spanish colors, but it sort of suited everything. I talk about my mother, who is Russian, and it looks like Russian folk art, and Edna Walling, who was a gardener. So it looks like the flowers. So it really is a beautiful expression of what the book is about.
Yeah, what a great representation of so many different people. And yeah, I love that. Well, so tell us about, this book. What led you to write this book? Because you are an author of many books. How many now, Belinda?
So 10 fiction books and one nonfiction about cats called The Divine Feline, which we talked about in the past. This is actually a nonfiction book as well, more serious than my cat book. And, when I was out, because I write historical fiction, and I've always researched that and really looked at real historical characters for my inspiration. But when I was out doing publicity, I could see readers were really interested to know the true stories behind my fiction stories. But I thought, nonfiction was the realm of journalists and professional biographers, and I really didn't know how I would write a nonfiction, how to go about it. Partly because my imagination is so big, I thought, how will I just stick to the facts and the truth? But then several years ago, I went through a harrowing event that left me traumatized. And I really wondered how I was going to put my life back together again. I really didn't know where to start. And then I realized I had been reading and researching about amazing people who'd faced incredible challenges and had put their lives back together and had lived courageous and bold lives. So I thought, well, it's my turn to really take inspiration from those characters. And having done that, I think when you've gone through something difficult, the best thing you can do is you reach behind you and you reach out your hand for other people who might be going through something similar. And you say, this is how I did it, and maybe this is how you could do it too, through telling these amazing inspirational stories. So that was really the reason why I put the book down into print.
Yeah, so beautifully done. And so, tell us, I love this definition of emboldened too that you start the book with. So I'm just going to read it. To impart boldness or courage, to instill with boldness, courage, or resolution enough to overcome timidity or misgiving, embolden. And so, tell us a little bit about kind of your harrowing journey, right? That led you to then write this book and bring in all these impressive women that you share their stories around.
Yeah, look, it was, quite a journey. I can't go into the full details because of legal reasons, but basically I had to flee my home in fear of my life. I, like you, Kimberly, had a home that I really loved with things that I'd collected and put my passion into. But I basically only got out with my beautiful, beloved 3 cats, my latest manuscript on a USB stick, and really just my wallet. And I had to start life again with that. And really, I left an entire life behind. And I didn't, no one else around me had really had that experience. In Australia, we have had floods and fires, just as you have had in the States. And so people had lost their homes. So I related to people on that regard, but there was no one in my immediate circle that had gone through such a upheaval and traumatic experience in their life. So for me, I really felt very isolated. Although I had tremendous love and support from the people around me, because it was such a unique and unusual experience, I really felt alone, I guess, in it. But the thing is about reading stories of other people who've gone through things and being a storyteller myself, I think the role of a storyteller in society has always been to encourage people. The purpose that we tell stories is so we can learn. They're like a virtual reality. And so I felt it was very important that the stories I told myself were stories of courage and boldness, that I didn't tell myself stories like, you're a victim, how did this happen to you, there's something wrong with you, you'll never get your life together again. Those are the wrong stories. And sometimes we do tell our stories, not even realizing that we're actually being our own worst enemy. So for me, the story that I wanted to tell myself, although I didn't feel like it at that time, was that I'll overcome this. I'll overcome this challenge. I'll turn this, trauma into a triumph, even though I had no idea how I was going to do that. But I realized life is often like a jigsaw puzzle. And if we can have the image of what we're heading towards, even if we've only got the shattered pieces, if we have that image, we can, put together one piece at a time or a couple of pieces and then a little piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And, when you are doing a jigsaw puzzle, that moment where you've got 5 pieces together and you can see a flower or a hand or a finger or something, you start to get that sense of encouragement, and it makes you bolder to continue going forward.
Yes, absolutely. I just recently worked with my mother on a puzzle. I think it was a 1,000-piece puzzle. And yes, there is something so just like rewarding, right, about getting those little pieces together. And I like that as a visual as you think about kind of with life, right? Of just like,
Yes.
okay, how do we just get these little pieces? Maybe we can start to see a border, the frame,
Yes. And that's exactly right. Because sometimes we think we have to do everything at once. And I think a very wise person said, we overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can achieve in a decade. And I'm not saying that everything will take a decade in our lives, but I think we have to give ourselves a bit of grace that we may not have all the answers at once. And to be satisfied if we get a little piece together, if we get a little chapter, if we overcome a little piece of the puzzle, then we should reward ourselves and really, I think you've quite often talked about progress over perfection, that sometimes it's really important to celebrate that progress and see that it's a journey. It really is a journey.
Oh, it's a journey. Oh, it's a journey. Yeah. So let's talk resilience, right? So, I mean, it's one of the chapters. And tell me how resilience has shown up for you through this ordeal. And then also with the woman that you also kind of discuss with regard to resilience.
Yeah. So with the book, what I wanted to do was I wanted to take 4 characteristics that I thought were important to living an emboldened and courageous life. And so before I forget to mention them all, I'll just mention them and then I'll focus on resilience. So there was resilience, a sense of purpose, passion, and connection. And so for the section on resilience, I actually chose my own mother, who was an incredible example of resilience. She was a white Russian born in China in a northern city, Harbin, which has minus 40 degrees winter, which I think would just define resilience before we went anywhere else with it. But her father had to flee Russia on horseback when the communists overtook Russia, and he sort of ended up in this northern city in China. So my family went through a number of difficulties. I mean, not only were they displaced from their home, But then the Japanese army invaded northern China. They had to flee Harbin and go to Shanghai. Shanghai was a city of incredible wealth and incredible poverty. And there my mother witnessed atrocities that do happen during a war. She witnessed executions as a young child, things that no child should see. But then, of course, when the Chinese communists took over China, all the foreigners had to get out. My mother ended up in a refugee camp in the Philippines before she eventually ended up in Australia and had to begin her life. And her mother had to begin her life again from scratch, which is the true story of the immigrant that, you know, we have in both Australia and in the United States. And so her life was very difficult. And yet my mother was a gentle soul, and her resilience was, you know, it was really proof that you don't have to be this tough, you know, life doesn't affect me kind of person to be resilient. She really, I think that what, you know, really she demonstrated to me was that she never stopped being a loving person, and she turned all those difficulties into wisdom, which I think is so important, because a lot of us turn our difficulties into bitterness. And my mother never allowed herself to be bitter. She'd seen the worst and the best of humankind, but rather than taking a negative view, she decided to really instill in her own children the wisdom and the importance of being strong and being able to get through difficult times, but also the importance of kindness and gentleness. And she had that towards especially children and animals.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's a lot for your mother. My goodness.
Yes.
So talk to us about purpose.
Yeah, look, purpose, I think I chose because I've written quite a few books set in France during the Second World War. And one of the characters that I researched for those was this incredible woman. She was an American woman named Virginia Hall. And she was born into a very wealthy family in the late 1800s, when basically women were expected to marry into other wealthy families to keep, you know, the power base going. But from a very young age, Virginia didn't want that life for herself. She wanted to be a diplomat. And the reason why she wanted that was she had a tremendous sense of purpose that she could contribute to world peace and keeping people safe. And she saw that a diplomat's role as the way that she could serve that. So when she was older, she, you know, persuaded her parents not to invest in a dowry for her, but to invest in her education. And she went to universities in Europe where she really studied, I think it was 5 or 6 languages that she became fluent in. And she, after university, joined the State Department, the US State Department, and got various positions, maybe clerical roles in consulates around the world. But every time she took the diplomat's exam, she was rejected. And we'd say most likely it was because of her sex, that it was, you know, 10 times as hard for her to get a role. There were only 6 women in the State Department, and there were thousands of men. So she was already overcoming a difficulty. But each exam, she kept saying, oh, I'm getting closer and I'm getting closer, and she's getting more experience in consular roles. But then a terrible tragedy unfolds and she loses her leg. And everyone expects her to go home and to just be an invalid at home and not amount to much. But she rallies herself again and she gets a consular position in Venice, and she does very, very well. And so she applies for the position of diplomat. And again, she's rejected, but this time on the basis that she's an amputee. And so I think at that point, anyone would have given up and said, you know, people don't see me. They see me as a woman. They see me as an amputee. I'm just not going to have any real influence in the world. But she doesn't give up. And when World War II breaks out, she actually takes the very dangerous role of driving ambulances. And she's driving it with basically a wooden leg in what is a converted bread van. And while everyone else is fleeing south, she's going forward into battle. But of course, France falls to the Germans, and she has to flee into Britain. But she's basically spotted by the British intelligence service, who sees her as an incredible asset Like, who would believe a female spy and a female spy with a wooden leg? No one would, suspect her undercover. So she gets sent back into France into an incredibly dangerous role. And, in that role, she was able to affect basically the course of the war in France. So her purpose, I chose her because for me, she really showed that purpose is often constantly thwarted. It doesn't just come to you on a silver plate. Sometimes if you really want to make a change and you really want to, have some effect in the world, you're going to meet a lot of pushback that you're going to have to continue and to actually show resilience, the first characteristic. And for me, she was the perfect example of that.
Absolutely. My goodness. I love this. The next piece is passion. And before we started recording, you and I spoke about how passion is a bit more of like a fiery sort of thing. And so we need to balance that out with rest, right? So tell me a little bit about the passion piece and the, of course, important component of balancing that.
Yeah. So the woman that I chose to illustrate passion was a woman that I based my book Golden Earrings on. She was a very poor Romani woman born in Barcelona, basically in a slum on the beach. But she rose to become the world's most famous flamenco dancer, or I like to sometimes say she's the second greatest flamenco dancer, with this very obscure writer in Sydney being the first. Amazing, called Belinda Alexandra. But, that's just in my imagination. Really, Carmen Amaya was the world's greatest flamenco dancer. And she really showed incredible passion. In flamenco, there's a term called duende, and duende refers to when a dancer is so passionate, she's lost in the zone, and she really connects to some higher power. And her dance has such an effect on her audience that they too are caught up in the passion. And Carmen Amaya was famous for sending her audience into, frenzies of passion. They would tear their clothes, they would, beat their chests, and really sometimes the fire brigade had to be called to bring in a hose to cool the whole audience down. They all caught on to Carmen Amaya's fiery passion. But in thinking about passion and talking about passion, I recently wrote a blog that I thought was very important to speak to us today, because we all sort of want to live passion, because passion gives us that energy to get out of bed. It gives us that energy to really, take on the challenges for the projects and the goals that we might have. And no one has really succeeded without really being passionate. But I think for a lot of us, we're suffering this incredible exhaustion at the moment. And even the idea of living a passionate life can seem just exhausting. And I think that it's important, an important element of passion is to know that passion is moments of your life. You can't live 24 hours in this frenzy of passion. You will burn yourself out. So like a beautiful piece of classical music, a beautiful piece of ballet music, I know you'll like that image, Kimberly, is we need to have the moments of speed and then, softness and to slow down, or the loud and the soft. And I learn flamenco and belly dance, and I know my teachers in those areas have said the moments of stillness are as important as the moments of movement. So I think, if you're feeling, the last thing I could do is think about living a passionate life, I'm just getting through the day, then you're exhausted. And before you can find passion, you really need to find that sense of rest. And I can think of no better place to learn about taking that rest than your channel, Kimberly, and your podcasts and your Instagram are full of tips of how to just stop and take that moment of breath before you live that fiery sense of passion.
Such good reminders. And, I always mispronounce his name, but Charles Debussy is the composer, right? But he's got that quote that music is what happens in between the notes.
Yes.
And again, I may be paraphrasing it slightly, but exactly kind of what you're saying. And it's the importance of recognizing that life is what happens in between these like big
Yeah.
crescendos, right? And how to
Yeah.
really,
I really am a person that just goes. Like I
yeah,
pack every inch of my life because I love life. And, I'm joking with a friend, like I want to be the most amazing dancer and writer, cat owner, activist. And those things are good. It's good to have those passions and that sense of purpose in your life. But you can also burn out and so I've learned to discipline myself to just, and you don't have to take weeks of rest. You can just give yourself an hour where you turn everything off. And I think nature, which we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about connection, or if you want me to segue into it, I can talk about it now, because
yeah,
the fourth woman I include in my book is a woman called Edna Walling. She's very famous in Australia. She was really active in the 1920s to the 1970s, and she was a landscape designer and gardener, and she wrote garden articles in Australian Home Beautiful, and she was very influential. She was a woman way ahead of her time in her thinking. But I chose her for the quality of connection, because often when we talk about connection, we immediately think of going to connection with other people. But before we can do that, I think we have to have an inner connection with ourselves, and then we have to have an inner connection with something bigger. And I think a lot of us have lost our connection to nature. And I often ask people, nature is the thing that sustains us. We're breathing oxygen that's provided by trees. And you would think for a lot of people, we think what sustains us is 24-hour news and our phones and chain stores and shopping malls. We forget that the very thing that we're living in is nature. And I think when we talk about passion, the fastest way to get those moments of stillness is to get yourself out in nature. And, most of us, we don't really need to take our phones with us. Most of us survived as children walking around without telephones. So I'm pretty sure as adults, most of us will survive just even going for half an hour walk without having we say mobile phones. I might have to translate that for my American friends. We say cell phone. So just not, and also, I'd be the kind of person that think, oh, I'm going for a walk, I'm going to learn a language, and just never have that moment of stillness. And I recently listened to Sarah Blakely, who is that amazing businesswoman and, who developed Spanx.
yeah.
And he says that she's factored into her life a false commute. Like she only lives 10 minutes from her office. But when she was younger and you didn't have a phone in your car and all of that connection, she used to have a longer commute, and she would just listen to the radio, listen to music on the radio. And that's when her best ideas would come to her. So now she's factored in this commute of just driving around, looking at the sky and looking at things to get her best ideas. And so I would say, remember to find that connection to nature. That is the best way to find that stillness. And then, of course, take moments to connect with yourself. Edna Walling, she came up with these amazing designs, but she didn't do it when she was in a state of enormous stress. She would walk out and look at nature and think. And we can't think when we can't be creative, and we can't connect with other people when we're under enormous states of stress. And just one little thing before I pause and let Kimberly say something. I was having this very interesting conversation with my hairdresser the other day, that we both think that people are one step away from rage. If they have to wait in line, if they have to wait on the telephone for a customer service officer, it seems that people are going from zero to this state of rage that doesn't, fit the situation. And we were both saying that is stress. That is human beings under stress. And most people don't want to act that way. And they would ask themselves, why am I acting so crazy in Target? It doesn't warrant the situation. And I think when we see that behavior in ourselves, we have to realize we're just human beings under enormous stress. And the best antidote to stress, apart from a little cat that needs to come and join you, I can highly recommend patting a cat for stress relief. But, we really just have to pause. We just need that moment of white space again.
So important. And yes, I do agree. Many people are one step away from rage. And it really, you're seeing that a lot since like things reopened after the pandemic. And I think it's just like people are so cooped up and, like all the rage on planes, right? I'm like, when was this happening before?
Yeah.
So it is. It's hard. It's tough. And I think you're absolutely right. It's stress and stress management is just, it's not easy. And yay for nature, yay for connection, yay for pets, yay for getting outside and taking care of ourselves and pausing and resting. Yeah. Which, Belinda, leads me to my last question, which is the name of the podcast, obviously. Tranquility du Jour. So how are you with where you are right now in your life and what's going on in your world and the release of your new book? How are you finding tranquility in your everyday?
Look, I think it comes down to habit, because nobody's going to do it for us. We live in a world where we're constantly getting pressured to do things or be things or buy things. And so for me, it's just to have that awareness that nobody is going to set up relaxation time for me. I really do, because I have a busy schedule. I have to say, I have to actually put in moments where I am going to turn off, and that's, it's something that I don't compromise, because when I take those moments, I know that when I am busy, I'm still more present and I'm doing a better job of it than if I'm just go, 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 go. So for me, I live in a part of Sydney that has beautiful trees and beautiful wildlife. And I think just stop and look at the wonder of it. Look at the ladybirds, look at the lizards, and, look at the butterflies, look at the beautiful plants, and just really look. Sometimes we're just so busy walking past incredible things. So I would say my secret to tranquility is to, when I go for a walk, go out with the intention of I am going to find beauty all around me.
And you do. Like right now in Washington, D.C., it's just filled with blooms. There's peonies. There's like roses everywhere. It's so stunning. And yeah, and it is. It's like it's easy to walk by because you're trying to get from point A to point B, but there's just so much beauty around if we can give ourselves the moment to pause, and it's not easy.
And my tip, because plane rides are stressful, can be stressful, my tip is get yourself a window seat and stare at the clouds. Just, be amazed by that. I'm in the air and I'm looking at clouds. How amazing is that? Don't worry about the person chewing loudly next to you. Just look at the clouds.
Right. Such good advice. And get noise canceling headphones.
Yes.
And everything's much better. Yes. Well, thank you, Belinda, so much for being with us again. And congrats on this beautiful new book. I'm so proud of you. You never cease to amaze me.
Thank you, Kimberly. Likewise.